I think there are so many ways that we could use AI. It's just, for right now, I definitely believe that drug promotion review takes a human touch.
Hello, welcome to a very special episode of FDA Watch. I'm your host, Wayne Pines. This episode is another installment in one of our signature multi-episode series that we produced in collaboration with law firms and other organizations in the FDA space. Today's episode is the third in our series, which we're doing jointly with one of the best-known food and drug law firms in the U.S., Arnall Golden Gregory. In the first part of the series, we focused on the current state of enforcement by FDA and the U.S. Department of Justice. In the second episode, we discussed customs regulations and international trade. And today, we're going to be talking about advertising and promotion, a subject that has always been near and dear to my heart. Our first guest today is Alan Minsk. Alan is very well known in the FDA community, one of the most distinguished lawyers. He's chair of the Food and Drug Practice and co-chair of the Life Sciences Industry Team at AGG. Alan has been on the show before, and so welcome back, Alan. It's good always to see you again.
Wayne, as always, thank you. It's always good to see you as well.
Laura LaBrie is an associate in AGG's Food and Drug and Healthcare Practices, a member of the Life Sciences Industry Team. She advises companies on FDA issues involving pharmaceuticals, devices, clinical trials, and commercialization. It's good to meet you, Laura.
Yes, great to meet you. Thank you.
So today we're going to be talking about advertising and promotion. And let me just set the stage. I've been involved with this for many, many decades, as Alan has. In September of 2025, the landscape changed. The president announced, supported by Secretary Kennedy and by then Commissioner McCarty, that there would be a crackdown on DTC promotion, but it really encompassed all promotion. And on September 9th, 40 plus untitled letters were issued. Since then, there have been another 40 plus untitled. A few of them have been warning letters issued by FDA's Office of Prescription Drug Promotion. A lot of those letters focused on DTC promotion, but not exclusively on DTC promotion. And so we're right now in the midst of what I would call the most extensive crackdown that has ever existed in the promotional field, and every single company that promotes products either to consumers or to healthcare professionals has got to be focused on what's going on at OPDP. There's more to come, which we'll talk about later, because the Office of Management and Budget just announced that there will be a proposed regulation issued by December of this year, which will expand the crackdown and make it much more challenging, if it's implemented, make it much more challenging for companies to promote directly to consumers. But let's start out with what's going on right now. And let me start out with you, Alan. Just a general question. What's your take on what's going on right now? What's your impression, having looked at this field for many decades, and now looking at what's been going on since last September?
Wayne, thank you. I think you've captured it well. I was going to say it's the issue du jour, but it's been going on beyond du jour. So It's been going on for a while, almost now a year. I've been doing this for 33 years, and I've never seen this many letters, certainly in one given year in a while, much less specific to direct to consumers. I think, as you noted, Senator Kennedy has been, I would say, maybe critical of DTC. I think we've seen certain members of Congress concerned that consumers are being deceived. They're not being provided all of the right information. And so I think, yes, there's definitely been focus on that. I think the sheer volume may be in part speculating maybe because of AI, and that OPDP is using AI to probably get to more items more quickly, possibly. But I would think that, and as you said, the OMB notice does, if implemented, and I think that's going to be a question is an if, because of First Amendment issues and or industry pushback or advertiser pushback, what have you. But certainly there does seem to be almost a sense of, are we basically trying to do away with DTC ads? Not just, should we crack down, but in essence, should almost be an elimination or a practical elimination, make it so difficult that we almost might call it a constructive prohibition. I do think that there'd be a false sense of security if companies just felt that they needed to focus on their direct to consumer. Certainly, FDA has taken action and will continue to take action for promotion to healthcare professionals as well. They have issued letters. I had a call this morning with a prescription drug client about promotion, and they were seeking my assistance in essence. How do we convince the company that the HCP advertising is just as important as DTC? Because the company was saying, we're not doing as much DTC. So in essence, why do we have even an MLR to some extent, medical legal review or promotional review committees, if the focus is on DTC, and we're not doing a lot of that. So we do have to remind companies that it's, drug promotion that happens to include direct to consumer and HCP. But you're right, DTC has certainly gotten, the media attention and FDA's attention.
Yeah. Laura, let me ask you to discuss what your take is. Specifically, I want to ask you, Alan mentioned AI. How do you evaluate what you see going on with regard to the use of AI by OPDP these days?
Yes, thank you. So we know that FDA has made statements saying that they are going to be using AI. We don't know exactly in what capacity and to how much they're going to be using it. But we can tell based on these letters, how quickly they're coming, how alike they are, how, for lack of a better term, robotic they seem, that it's safe to assume they're using AI to write the letters and also likely to be reviewing these 2253 submissions that companies have to provide before putting out promotional pieces. So thinking through the different ways that AI could be used either by marketers or by OPDP is really an interesting question here, because you have to think through how AI might be used to look at these submissions. Are they going to be looking for specific words that might trigger a specific letter? And also, on the other side, how are the marketing teams going to start using AI? Are they going to start trying to use it in the review process? We haven't run into it personally, but I've talked to several colleagues who've had review teams trying to use AI to much pushback from the reviewers, just because we find that AI doesn't always pick up on the nuance of drug promotion. But also, there are certain benefits on the marketing side of being able to use like AI generated images as opposed to having to get actors. Say you want to switch out how someone looks, if they're using a different impression, or if you want to use someone who looks completely different, you can now use AI generated photography or AI generated images specifically to change that up without having to get a new actor in for the studio or to invite that actor back into the studio.
And Wayne, I would just, add, if I can, back to the DTC and somewhat just the changing technologies. I mean, when you and I were younger, when we said DTC, we were typically thinking of radio and TV. Okay. Now, the internet, of course, came along while you and I were, active and still active. But this idea of social media and AI just evolving so quickly, that many of the letters have been focusing on influencers and endorsers and social media and things like that. So it's not just the TV ads, which of course FDA can go after, but it really is so many new technologies that companies are using to get the patient to then go to the doctor and say, what about this product I saw? Or getting kind of this push, if you will, to get a product well known that everyone and their mother wants to start going to their doctor for some dermatological condition or some ophthalmic condition or what have you. So the technology is changing so fast that I think that that's in part, I'm not going to say it's the reason, but I think it's one reason why Congress and FDA are concerned about DTC, because it's frankly exploding so fast exponentially.
Do you think, I've said this publicly, and I'd like to get your views on it. Do you think that all of the submissions on 2253, and for those who are not familiar with the term, 2253 is the form that is used for companies to submit their promotional materials at the time of first use, materials that are being submitted to FDA now. Alan, do you think that all of those 2253 submissions are being reviewed by an AI program at OPDP or at Appleby, at the corresponding division within the Center for Biologics?
It's a good question. I don't know for a fact. I can't say I know. I would be surprised if most are not going through something. Is it 100%? I don't know. I think it's certainly more than it was 6 months ago, which was more than 12 months ago. I don't know if if Laura has any inside information, or if Wayne, you have any inside information. I don't know for a fact, but I would be surprised if most, if not all, are going through some sort of system.
And Laura, let me do a deeper dive into AI. What are you advising your clients to do with regard to AI? To use AI, not just to generate images or to generate advertising, but to do an actual review as if they were OPDP. Does that make any sense?
I haven't advised any clients to do so. I know some are looking into that as kind of a primary reviewer software or maybe even a back-end reviewer software, but more so in the primary space. And I haven't advised it because I don't think that at this time people have had a lot of success with it. I think that there's a lot lost on AI when it comes to the verbiage of drug promotion. And specifically, I've heard examples where it's trying to suggest different names for drugs because it's like this is not going through our system correctly. It's flagging an issue every time. Why don't you change this word? And it's the drug name, or it might be the disease state. And so I think there's definitely some growing room there with AI as it is. And every time people try to apply it to a new area, there's always going to be a bit of a growing pain. I think that right now that's where it is. I haven't advised. I wouldn't for now, but I'm more than open to look at any type of use case that would disprove that, because I think there are so many ways that we could use AI. It's just a lot of what we do really does take a human touch. And maybe I'm saying that from my perspective for now, and it could change, but for right now, I definitely believe that drug promotion review takes a human touch.
My experience in talking to clients, both on the ad promo, I'd also say on the quality GMPs, the good manufacturing practice quality related sections. A lot of companies are talking about it. I think they're struggling with it. I would be careful about advising to use it exclusively. There's a lot of nuances. I mean, even at our firm, we have we advise about how we use it, where we won't use it. But I would point out that there was a warning letter that was sent to a company on the quality side, where FDA alluded to it and said, in essence, you were relying on AI for certain record keeping, et cetera, and you failed. And at the end of the day, you have to comply. You, meaning human, have to comply. And so I think the reliance, if companies want to use AI, maybe as a starting point, I could see that to generate ideas, things like that. But there are nuances at the end of the day. And I would even say to some extent, some subjectivity. And I think, when you look at even FDA letters, how people perceive things, can AI really, capture that? Can they capture the nuances, the spacing, it's a story at the end of the day, these ads. And I think that's something that can get lost by a machine. And so I think while the FDA may use it to look out, as Laura said, certain search terms, at the end of the day, I have to hope to believe that there's a person, other than just signing the letter, that they're actually reviewing it themselves and saying, okay, the AI told us where to start or gave us a starting point. Now we, reviewer, at FDA, or we reviewer, legal reviewer, for example, for a company. Now let's take that and now use our human intuition and experience and things along those lines.
Yeah. Well, Alan, you mentioned you've been at this for 33 years. I have to admit, I've been at it longer, as you know, and have been advising companies on these. How has the dynamic within a company changed as a result of what's been going on since September 9th? Does your role change in terms of providing legal advice, or to talk about a little bit about that dynamic with a company?
I don't know if it's changed. I mean, again, we're lawyers, and so our job has always been, whether or not it was before AI or before DTC. I mean, I had a new DD Mac, before there was OPDP and all those various things. Okay, so the law is the law. I think a couple places, I guess, where we've, on the one hand, I think outside counsel, in-house counsel, compliance can certainly point and say, hey, FDA enforcement is up. So as we are reviewing pieces, let's be aware that FDA is not as dormant as it might have been, or excuse me, OPDP may not have been as dormant as it was, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago. Okay, so that, if you want to say, helps on the compliance side. But every company, and I'm not knocking anybody, people have got a job to do at the company. So marketing and commercial are going to be aggressive because that's their job, and and regulatory is going to push back, and legal, et cetera. I think that, because let's say we were going back to the earlier point, DTC has become a large part of the issue, that now people are saying, well, that was DTC, we're not doing that. Okay, so the fact that it's increased, the fact that the police officer is pulling over a lot of people on that street, well, that's not my street. Okay, so I'll be mindful that if I go on that street, the police officer's out, but I'm not on that street right now. And so we still have to remind, okay, first of all, it's a police officer can go on a lot of streets, and they're not exclusively on that street, if I want to keep that, analogy going. And second of all, the law is the law. And ultimately, we have to just remind them that we've got a job to do. I don't know that the what's the word I'm looking for? The tolerance has necessarily changed. I think companies are still doing what they're doing. Commercial is still trying to sell product, and regulatory is still making sure something's not false or misleading and not off-label. And legal's trying to herd cats, okay? And medical's doing what medical does. So I don't know in that regard that it's different. Maybe there's some people that are being a little bit more conservative when it comes to DTC, but I don't think that in general there's the hiding under the bed, we're not going to do anything. I think that probably there's just a little bit more discussions. That's all.
Right. Laura, what are you saying?
I'm seeing a lot of the same. I also would say that there may have been an initial scare right in September, about a year ago. And then from there on, people, did their internal audits. And if anything, while it's a bit of a double-edged sword, you don't want there to be enforcement, but it also has been a kind of good thing from a legal perspective, only because it validates what advice you've been given. Like Alan said, the standards haven't changed. The law hasn't changed. But now, where we said, hey, I think we need to tighten up this claim, or, hey, I think this might come across a certain way, we now have letters coming through that validate that and say, hey, this person got in trouble for a similar claim. This is why we changed it. And we're able to point to an example and explain why we made that change more easily.
If I can, Wayne, beyond the DTC, one area that I don't think it's a hot issue, but certainly where we've seen maybe a little bit more enforcement are qualifiers and disclaimers, where FDA might have said, there's always a couple letters here and there where FDA would say, well, we saw that you put an asterisk or a dagger or something that explained, but it was too small and it didn't override the overall misleading impression, that kind of thing. I think we're seeing more of those letters where companies are trying, probably because legal and regulatory said, well, we need to put a qualifier or disclaimer somewhere. So commercial said, okay, we'll put it X, okay? And hoping that, we don't want to take away our positive messaging, so we'll do what the lawyer and the regulatory person told us to do. And maybe the company said, okay, we're willing to take, that commercial risk. And FDA certainly, I think issuing, maybe I've seen a little bit more enforcement in that regard. And I would say that Laura and I and others on our team that are involved in PRC and LR, the review process, are saying, listen, that's not a matter of DTC or healthcare professional. That's FDA saying, nice try. It really needed to be closer to the statement that you were qualifying. And so, in that regard, it's been helpful more for us to give specific examples. Even if maybe it was 2 or 3 years ago, and I thought it was a little bit of a silly letter, but overall the letter was fine. But they even talked about it was like an email signature thing where the signature was before the ISI. Okay, and FDA said when you see the signature, then people think, well, it's like the movie. The credits are rolling on the movie. Who's going to stay for the credits? But they had to put the ISI in essence before the signature block, kind of thing. I think that kind of stuff is helpful to remind companies that FDA really wants the risk information to be prominent and not just as an aside.
Yeah, that leads me into just a general broad question. What do you see as the big issue? Certainly, the use of qualifiers, the prominence. They haven't specified any font size specifically, but they have talked about font size. They've talked about white space. Now they're doing a deeper dive into the data that actually supports any claims that are being made. A year ago or 2 years ago, they didn't really do that. In terms of the mega issues that a company needs to look out for and be especially conscious of, I'm going to ask both of you. Alan, let me start with you, and then Laura. What are those big issues as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think you've hit on them. The one I think that we're seeing, maybe that I feel like I'm seeing more and more, is FDA really kind of challenging the data, or the support for the data. Retrospective, prospective, the label said something other, the article that you said says X, but it also says Y. You didn't clarify that it was this type of thing. The methodology, the prominence has always been an issue, conspicuousness, all those things. That's always an issue. Fair balance. I mean, that goes back forever. Okay. Placement of the ISI, all those kinds of things. Comparative claims. I think it's not telling the complete story. One other thing I would say, and I'm surprised it's still happening, the limitations of use. So a company has an indication, they've got a limitation of use, which is really part of the indication, and they don't put the limitation of use as prominent, okay? And FDA says there was limitation of use in the indication, you didn't provide that. So that one it's happened more than once. I mean, it's happened a few times that you would think, and we have every client that's got a limitation of use, like, buddy, that's part of the indication. Well, no, it's a separate, no, it's under the indication section, folks. It's got to be there. So that's kind of I don't want to say silly. It's just one that's like, it's so obvious. But I would say the FDA really peeling more into the data and looking at the study, and did you tell a complete story? So it's not just the prominence of the disclaimer or the fair balance or the placement of the ISI, but we're actually going to look at the data itself and not just rely on you, whether that's the article, whether that's the study, et cetera. That's a little bit more critical than I think we've seen in the last couple of years. Laura?
Yeah, what you said reminded me of one thing, and that is FDA increasingly wants the complete indication, not just the limitations of use, but in some cases, the verbatim of the indication. Some of those indications are very long, and getting that into social media has been beyond a challenge for a lot of companies. But Laura, same question to you. What do you see as the big issues, the mega issues here?
That was actually a perfect segue, because what I was going to say is that social media and influencers are one of the big hot topics. We are seeing so many different social media platforms come into the advertising space. We're seeing a lot when it comes to, if Facebook or if Meta generally is changing the way that they allow ads, we then have to revisit all of our pieces. We have to look at what's going to actually be visible to the user. We have to look at prominence. And like you said, trying to fit all of the context, whether that be the full indication and the full indication as well as balance information into smaller and smaller spaces, or into places where these social media platforms are pushing back and saying, hey, we don't actually like this wording. Like I know, for instance, Meta doesn't like to use certain pronouns. You have to make it more general. They don't want it to come across as if giving actual medical advice. So the social media platforms themselves are getting more into this nitty gritty than just allowing placement for advertising. So I think there's a lot growing in social media advertising and just use and being able to reach these people, but also looking at the requirements on the back end and how to find a good compromise there while trying to find a way to work with your marketing team, allow them to work in spaces they want to work, but also try to keep that within your compliance, within your SOPs. And, that's going to be an ongoing battle and a huge area for enforcement.
And I would, if I can, 2 points kind of related, but not exactly. So to follow up on that with the social media and DTC, I think it gets back to some extent, as you say, these can be very long indications. And often, the commercials team will say, but the average person doesn't understand that. We got to make this user friendly. So it's not just the word count or the space count and all of that, but it's like, that's too Latin, if you will. That's too legalistic. It's too medical. So we have to make it simple, stupid, except if you make it too simple, stupid, you've truncated the indication or you've minimized the risk or what have you. You've left out the adult indication or the pediatric or the, again, limitation of use. I'd also, and I'm speculating, but I think it's an educated guess, that FDA is probably going back to AI, that OPDP may be using AI to review some of the data and references that the companies are using to support, because otherwise you're just asking individuals who are very, very busy at OPDP to be reading all of these articles. And they may be doing that, but it also may be a way that they're able to use AI and say, is that article actually saying that? And I think that's probably another way that FDA is using AI to look at the data itself.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break now. Don't go anywhere because we will be right back. And we're back. We're talking with Alan Minsk and Laura LaBrie from Arnall Golden Gregory. Let me start in a different direction and go more to the future. A few weeks ago, OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, announced that there would be a proposed regulation that would be issued by this December. There's always slippage in those timetables, but it's consistent with what President Trump actually said on September 9th, 2025, and that is there will be an effort to return direct-to-consumer advertising on television, on radio, and by extension now social media, to the pre-1997 days. Pre-1997, the requirements for safety information were so onerous, so significant, that it was virtually impossible to do direct-to-consumer advertising on television or on radio or in any electronics because you had to have so much safety information. In August of 1997, with a final issuance in 1999, FDA changed that dynamic with a proposed guidance and then a final guidance. Now, OMB is saying we're going back to that. We're going back to those days. Alan, let me start out with you. What do you think is happening there? Is that going to happen? What are the issues here?
Well, I'd say bring out my magic 8 ball. I don't know if that will age me. I'm not sure if Laura remembers the magic 8 ball. I think it's anyone's guess. What I would say is I think there would certainly be some First Amendment issues. I wonder what one thing I was going to say, maybe it's somewhat cynical, is what will the networks do if they don't get that revenue from all the, there'll be more car ads, I guess, but there won't be as many drug ads. I think FDA will walk a fine line, probably with the constitutionality issue of saying we're not necessarily saying you can't do it, but we'll make it effectively very difficult. And as I tell clients, you don't have to use social media. There's nothing that says thou shalt use social media. If you use social media, these are the rules. Okay. Now, so that gets back to, is this an effective prohibition or a constructive prohibition? We don't know what it will actually look like. Do I see drug companies? Do I see potentially an AMA of the world or patient groups? On one hand, without getting political, it does seem that there's a value. We don't want consumers to be deceived. We don't want doctors being just sort of told by the patients, prescribe me this. So there's certainly validity or valid concerns, I guess. On the other hand, is the answer to basically do away with it, where patients do get a lot of information and they do feel empowered, and drug companies do find, and device companies, find it to be a useful means to do things. If it's just promoting to doctors, are we basically saying, well, patients can't get this information? If we want transparency and all that kind of stuff in education, are we doing away with that? So I think that there's this fine line, and that's always where the First Amendment comes into play. So I'm not trying to be difficult or evading your question. I think it will ultimately be, what do they actually say? Okay, what's actually proposed? I suspect that there would be a legal challenge because, God bless the lawyers, someone's going to be ticked off and find somebody who's going to sue. And again, not to get political, but depending on how long if there is a challenge, how long does it go? There might be another administration. So I don't know. I do think that there's probably, I could also see possibly industry trying to find a happy medium with FDA. That is, don't effectively prohibit, but let's see if we can come back to something that makes some sense. A little bit of negotiations, if you will. I don't represent pharma and I don't represent bio, but it's very possible that the industry may say, if this is where it's headed, let's see what we can do to show we can be responsible or more responsible according to Congress or according to, FDA or Secretary Kennedy or whomever.
I think it's 100% inevitable there will be litigation on this. I can't imagine how it would escape it. Laura, you don't remember the pre-1997 days. I'm just guessing at that. But what do how do you view what's going on? Because it's basically I presume, I don't mean to be too personal, you grew up with DTC advertising. And you're accustomed to it. I remember the days before I was involved in that 1997 guidance,
Yeah.
and so I remember vividly those days and the struggle the companies had. But you grew up with it. How do you view this environment and the way that FDA is approaching this?
Yeah, I could walk, but I couldn't read in 1997. So I can't say that I remember any of this. But I do think that there's going to be, I think there's going to be a variety of issues of trying to apply pre-smartphone rules to a smartphone reality.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's going to be difficult getting people to understand what the alternative is. That, and people bring up other countries. If you go to another country, they don't have these drug ads. So, I think it's hard to put yourself in that mindset now because we're so used to seeing it all the time that we've become somewhat desensitized to a lot of what is out there. But I think it is difficult to say what's actually going to happen. And I know that this administration has had a lot of issue with how much cost has gone into advertising from drug companies and I think there also, is something to be said there that, maybe there could be more value given to R&D as opposed to advertising. But I think it's going to be hard to get the drug companies to agree with that because they have put so much in to all these different mediums. So I think there's going to be litigation. I think there's going to be pushback from a variety of different stakeholders. And from there, it's hard to say. I think that finding a happy medium is the most likely. But I cannot even guess what that's going to end up looking like.
What will the 17-year-old influencer do now?
Right.
Okay. So I think I could see the patients in AMA taking positions on both sides, which is, yes, we need to be protected, but we do get value from this. The companies would not spend this kind of money if it wasn't benefiting them, but also, while it may sometimes be annoying, the number of car commercials and, plaintiff lawyers ads and drug ads, but clearly patients do feel more empowered. Whether that's TV ads or social media, what have you. And the expression that came to mind when Laura was talking is, can you put the genie back in the bottle?
Yeah.
I think it's already out there. So I think the question is, how does the FDA find a happy medium, or Congress find a happy medium to try to protect the consumer more? Does that mean more disclosure? And then it's up to the drug company to figure out how that's done. Maybe the ads are no longer 30 seconds, but now they're 60 seconds. And then the question is, will the average consumer tune out? But that may be sometimes what may have to happen.
Having seen many changes in the drug industry over the decades, a few things occurred to me. One is, I remember back in the early 2000s when drug companies used to hand out gifts to doctors, pens. My wife is a doctor. I've got lots of pens. I still have pens, and I still have cups and all sorts of stuff. When the pharma code said that was no longer going to be, a lot of the companies said, that's great. I never wanted to spend money on that kind of stuff to begin with, and just so long as there's uniform enforcement. I think we're going to be a little bit surprised if and when FDA issues its proposal for comment at who takes what position on this. There will certainly be a split. There will be many people in the Congress. A lot of Democrats have proactively opposed DTC advertising, and I think you will be support from the Democrat, no matter who's in charge of Congress in the next year. So there will inevitably be a major debate on this issue, and I don't know that anybody's got a clear enough crystal ball these days to know how it's going to resolve.
Well, it's interesting. You talk about the cups and the mugs and things like that. And when we saw more DTC and the internet and all this and Zoom calls and all that, to some extent, we saw certain sales folks' jobs eliminated because you didn't have to go into the doctor's office as much. Okay. Well, now if we sort of doing away with DTC or certain things, then maybe all of a sudden it's great to be a sales rep because your audience is now just the doctor again. I mean, it will be interesting. Someone's ox is going to be gored, but someone probably benefits from it.
Laura, go ahead.
Yeah, if I had to add to that from my perspective. I mean, I was raised by a orthopedic surgeon and ER nurse, so I don't know if we bought pins in my house for years because my dad would just grab as many as he could, or all the stress balls and notepads. And then it moved into what is allowed now. It moved into, total knee replacement catalogs and different med device catalogs, or different disease state pieces that I now look at and review. So I think that it is interesting to think of what might be the move. Will there be more disease state commercials going forward if we can't? Because I think that is one area that we haven't seen movement yet, but I think is likely is, we, instead of those ad spots being used for the drug, being used for the disease.
It's an excellent point because it's still a way to have a touch with the consumer to then go to your doctor. Hey, I have this condition and I saw that there was this product, Pines Pharmaceuticals seemingly has a product for my whatever. Okay. I don't know. They didn't mention the product, but do you know anything about that? I think that's a very good point that Laura makes.
I want to again shift gears, ask about competitor complaints. What do you advise your clients when they come to you and they say, my competitors, let me ask Laura this first. My competitors are doing this, they're getting away with all sorts of promotion, and you're sitting there as the L on MLR, and you won't let me do it. Laura, what do you say?
The biggest thing that I start with is, who are you aiming this towards? And do you want them to be looking back at you? I think the starting points of being able to point fingers at someone is being ready to have those fingers pointed back at you. So before we even move forward with what's being said and what's being done, I like to reflect on what we've been doing, because fairly often we're making claims that we may be doing so in a way that we find more acceptable. But if they were to go back and look at our website, they might also have complaints about the way that we've characterized something. So I think initially my idea is to say, let's look at who are we poking a bear or are we poking a squirrel? If we're poking a bear, you've got to be ready to have all of that come back to you. But even if you are just poking a squirrel, they could get a good legal counsel that then creates a lot of issues for you. And look at how much you're going to be benefiting from that complaint versus how much you might end up having to spend fighting back and forth with that company.
I would say this, when they come to basically ask, well, the other guy's doing it. There's a few things here. One is, do I care? I'm on LMR or PRC. I don't know what they're doing, and that they may or may not be doing it right. That's not my role. Then the question is, well, we want to do what they're doing. Well, let's compare. Are they doing something compliant, or do we feel, hey, we can do what they're doing? Okay, we can follow the crowd. If they say, well, if we can't do it, at least they shouldn't have to do it, so let's do something about that. Then I think the question is, do you want them to stop, or do you want them to get in trouble? If you want them to stop, often you could go to FDA and you could maybe get them to stop and get them into trouble. But we know that FDA has a lot of things to review. And while they send out letters, there's thousands and thousands of pieces. And often these can go into a black hole. So if you want them to stop, typically I would say write a trade complaint to the company and just say, we became aware of this. Sometimes the general counsel, hey, you may not have been aware of this, but we saw this. Hey, you may want to tell your team that they can't do this. Okay. And sort of company to company, not even necessarily outside counsel, but company to company. And then if it persists, then you may consider outside counsel, what have you. It doesn't mean you can't write FDA, but if you write FDA, you need to know that it may not go anywhere, and it may not go anywhere anytime soon. So then if you want to stop, maybe it's the trade complaint. The other options, there is the National Advertising Division of Better Business Bureau. It's not used as much on the prescription drug side, although it can be. You typically see that more for OTC drugs or cosmetics or dietary supplements, consumer type products. There's always things like the Lanham Act, which is deceptive advertising, but that's a lawsuit. You're typically not, going to go there. There are other regulatory bodies like the Federal Trade Commission. I would say that often what I do when it comes to ad promo or labeling is if I write FDA, I also try to see if I can come up with sort of a public health risk. Oh my God, that's not only misleading and false misleading, misbranding, but oh my God, if used that way, that could actually harm people. And then I might even throw in, if they've gotten dinged by FDA in the past, there's probably even quality related issues. If they can't get their advertising right, I bet they can't get their packaging and their production right. So maybe compliance, you need to go in, et cetera. So you sort of throw everything against the wall. But again, I think Laura, in part, what are we trying to accomplish? Are we trying to basically keep up with the Joneses? And we think the Jones, if that's one thing, we look at that. If it's, hey, we can't keep up with the Joneses because the Joneses are violative, or we take a different risk profile, then the question is, do we write a letter to the GC of the Joneses and say, hey, you need to stop that, see what they do, see if they blink. Sometimes these companies will blink because, frankly, they may know themselves that they were, running 70 into 55. We've certainly counseled clients to say, listen, that's a business risk. At some point, the competitor could push back. And and the company was like, well, okay, well, then we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. Well, then they get the trade complaint. The bridge has come. Okay, so is it worth it? Is this claim that you're making, is it worth it in dollars and or, theme to fight it? Is this the phrase that pays? Because if it is, then maybe it is worth defending, whether that's FDA, whether that's NAD, whether that's court, et cetera. Or is this just a throwaway that you're going to spend $25,000 to defend it, and you're probably not getting much bang for the buck? So for that, guys, you thought you could get away with it. You win 65 and a 55. Cop is giving you a warning. They're not giving you a ticket. You know what, guys? Let's just go back to 55 for the next, mile or two.
Okay. Well, this is certainly a topic that we're going to be revisiting, certainly if and when the FDA issues its proposed regulation. We're going to have another session like this and talk about what the FDA is proposing and how realistic it is, and the inevitability, I think, of litigation and what companies need to do. So let me thank you both for really doing a good job of making this clear to our audience here. And I want to also thank our podcast creator, our executive producer, Michael Evan Epstein, our assistant producer, Sam Hoffmeister. And I want to remind all of you who are listening, if you're driving in a car right now, But if you're listening and you're near a piece of paper, write down fdawatch.net, and that will, if you go to that website, fdawatch.net, you can subscribe to the podcast. We have a lot of followers, but it's different to be a follower as contrasted with being a subscriber. So please do subscribe. Go to fdawatch.net, put in your email address, and you'll be able to subscribe. And every week you'll get a notice saying that a new episode has been posted. Our podcast is growing exponentially. We have more than 25,000 downloads so far. We promote mainly on LinkedIn. So if you're interested in seeing what is being posted, then check your LinkedIn account. And as we say at the end of every episode of FDA Watch, if you really want to watch what FDA is doing, listen to FDA Watch. This is Wayne Hines.